Um, so hello, everyone. I am so excited today to be able to have a special guest. And I know if you've looked in your syllabi, you'll see in the syllabus that I mentioned my brother, Rushan Mew. And this is Rushan Mew. In a
Right.
moment, I will be asking him some questions. Uh, but since, we've been slowly but surely going through the systems of the body, we've been looking at sensory input. We've been looking the last module just before spring break. We considered emotions, and just before that, we looked into pain as well. So we're moving into now the next part of the semester. We're really going to be looking at um, very specific um, neurological conditions and what this tells us about the brain. So just continuing our journey in exploring the brain and what different parts of the brain um, is involved in and what it does. So Rushan, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. And I wonder, could you just briefly introduce yourself, whatever you think is relevant for us to know, maybe just a little bit of where you're from, how long you've been in the United States, things like that.
And we'll do so.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rushan. I am from South Africa originally. That's my sister. I immigrated to the US in 2022. So I've been here for going on 2 years. In a month's time, I think it's 2 years. Um, Living in Chicago at the moment. And yeah, it's been an interesting last journey this last year, which I'll share with you guys in a moment. But just how I got here physically to where I am. Um, that was just there was a COVID delay. It was an interesting journey. I'm now happy here, and I'm finally getting some medical help that I wasn't able to get in the UAE, in South Africa. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, you
Okay.
want to continue and share what I
Well, so yeah,
more about where I was.
would you mind telling us about what happened probably starting around 2011,
Yeah, sure.
correct?
Um, I had a pretty normal life. I thought I was hardworking. I probably pushed myself too hard. And in 2011, um, Darling actually came over to come visit, and we were traveling around South Africa. What was interesting, it was in March, April of that year, I started having weird sensations I've never had, like anxiety attacks. I felt like I had to enunciate my words with more effort because it felt like I wasn't saying what I wanted to say in my brain. And
So it was kind of like it felt like
yeah,
things weren't clear, coming
it's
out very
it
clearly.
felt like what I was saying wasn't what I was hearing come out. There was a disconnect. Um, and then my sister came back to South Africa, to America from South Africa. And after dropping her off at the airport, my mom and I were driving back to Durban from Johannesburg. I lived in Durban at the time. And my mom was doing the daytime driving. I was working on the laptop a little bit. And then we stopped just before sunset because my mom doesn't like to drive when she can't see. And she's so wow. And I was probably driving for about half an hour when I told my mom, I'm getting a really, really bad migraine. I've had one or two in my life, one being in one or two being actually in high school, um, but never to this effect. It was the worst headache I could ever experience. At first, I thought it was just building, and my mom was offering to drive there. I said, no, well, I'll push on. And probably about 10 minutes later, I pulled over, and that was it. I was nauseous. I had to wear sunglasses at night because the lights were too much, movement was too much, the noise was too much. It just felt so overwhelming.
Mm.
And it was the longest journey home because we were trying to stop everywhere. It was a national holiday, so we couldn't get medication along the way. Ultimately, about 8 hours later, 1 o'clock in the morning, we got to Durban and got into my apartment. The next day, my mom went to the pharmacy and told them what had happened, and they gave me over-the-counter medication for what they thought was migraine. Typically, they're anti-inflammatories. Um, they said, if that doesn't help, I need to go to my doctor. Now, there was a series of holidays
Mm.
in South Africa. So the Monday was a public holiday too. So the Tuesday, I didn't feel better. we went to a doctor. I didn't have a doctor there because I had just recently moved. And he said to me, he's going to give me something stronger, which is prescription. It's a little wafer you put under your tongue for migraines. And if that doesn't solve it, I need to go to the hospital. As luck would have it, by Wednesday, we were getting me to the hospital.
So can I pause for just a moment? So isn't it interesting, the students and I, we've been talking about how, um, you know, when I shared the 7 neurological um, systems of emotions, they have two things in common, right? They have uh, a source of energy or a shift in the body, and then there's a call to action. And then if we add pain to that, pain is not necessarily an emotion per se, but it is the body's strongest messenger, right?
Motivator, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a strong messenger, it's a motivator. So if it doesn't, if our body mind doesn't get our attention in any other way, pain will definitely be it. Now, in this case, pain being incredibly intense. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I ended up in hospital overnight on that Wednesday evening. So it started the Friday and now it was Wednesday already. They did an MRI, and the next morning they sent me home. I won't go into too much detail, but ultimately they never told me that I had a brain aneurysm, that they'd
So a
seen it on
brain
the MRI.
aneurysm.
Yes.
Yeah.
On the left-hand side, on my ophthalmic artery, just as the optic nerve and the ophthalmic artery kind of touch and run parallel, which is a very weird place to have it.
Yeah, and
Apparently,
if you may
2% of aneurysms are there. It's not in the circle of Willis.
Okay, so
Um,
if you may pause just for a second. So, the students just right at the beginning, we learned about, the system, the visual system. So this is like right there close to your eye, right?
yep.
Before it crosses over at the optic
Yep.
chiasm.
Yep.
Yes, okay.
So I could literally see when I felt agitated or excited or adrenaline, when my heart was beating fast, I could see my heartbeat in my eye as it dimmed and lit up because it was
In
irritating the nerve.
Interesting.
Um, they gave me medication, once again, not telling me what it was, for about 10 days. One is topiramate, which they typically give for migraines, and the other one was an anti-inflammatory, and but obviously stronger than I would have previously had, and they said this should solve it. Well, to make a long story short, it didn't. The headaches continued badly, and I was incapacitated until a friend of mine who worked at the hospital where the tests were done requested a copy of my file. And when she looked through, she realized that it actually stated there an aneurysm, and that's where all the symptoms were. And about 2 months later, I had it coiled. So they went in through my groin on each side. They go in with a catheter, they feed it up through the heart, briefly up your
Yes.
neck. Fortunately, I wasn't awake for this.
Yes.
It can be a 45-minute
Procedure.
procedure. When they got there, they found that it was a fusiform aneurysm. So it wasn't the bulge around the hole. It wasn't
Yes.
a stat. It was open. So after putting what they did, a coil in there, so they through the catheter, they feed like a little Goldilocks, those things that you scrub your toilets with, or your actually you probably scrub your pots with that.
Yes.
So it's metal. I think it's tungsten and platinum, so it's not
Probably
magnetic.
tungsten sounds about right.
That is coiled with memory. So when it uncoils on the other side, because it's being fed through a straight catheter, it actually coils up into a little ball inside the aneurysm. So it slows down blood flow. And then because it was open, they had to go through the other groin area to put a little stent
Seal,
in to keep it in place. Yeah.
like a seal.
So they call it a balloon, but it's like a stent in my brain. So it basically keeps it closed. And that was the procedure. So immediately, actually, my headaches went away.
Yeah, and if I may recall, it was very stressful as a family member, right? Because they tell you it's going to be 45 minutes. Obviously, they couldn't have known what they didn't know until they got up into the actual aneurysm. And like you said, it was open instead of the normal bubble one, which we were looking at. If you're reading this module and you looked at my lectures, the typical ones will be more rounded, so it's much easier just to block it, right? This one was open. But yes, as a family member, if you're sitting there and they tell you, well, the chances of survival is, I can't remember what they
So
said.
the third, they said about a week before I went in, I saw the person performing the surgery, and he said, I must keep in mind that there's a third chance I don't make it.
So
There's a third
30%
chance I'm a
chance.
vegetable, and then third
Yeah, so
chance
you had a
everything's fine.
30% chance of being okay. And
Yeah.
so they tell you this. I rushed from America to South Africa. I didn't get to see him before he got rolled into surgery, just got to talk to him on the phone. And then you're sitting there and 45 minutes went past. I think it lasted 3.5, 4 hours.
4 hours and 15 minutes, something like
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
so by that time you're thinking, oh no, the worst thing has happened. But it's because they found that they had to actually build a seal,
Yeah,
right?
so they had to do the procedure almost twice, plus position all these things together. So it just complicates the procedure a lot.
Yeah. Okay.
So that was the origin itself, like of everything that's happened since then in my life. So, I mean, it's literally been the last quarter of my life that I've been in this space.
Yeah. So sorry for interrupting again. I was just going to say, you were very fortunate, and we think about this a lot because we do have a family member who had an aneurysm as well. But what typically happens with aneurysms is that he's burst and he just
It's
passed
usually
away.
sudden without warning.
Yeah, without warning.
If it ruptures, you have a 40% chance of actually getting help. And of those people, most people don't actually make it.
Because it just floods the brain with blood, right? And it's immediately the brain just, and we looked at the circle of Willis a little bit. Make sure you know the circle of Willis. It's so important because when we talk about strokes, that's another thing we have to know about the circle of Willis. That very important source of blood supply to the brain, right?
Yeah.
So could you talk a little bit about the emotional impact? The physical, I know the physical impact, but the emotional impact.
Well, obviously before the operation or procedure, there is a little bit of fear for the unknown, things like that. But surprisingly, I didn't feel that. I just felt if I have this chance of surviving, then I need to make the most of the time I had left. So I spent time on calls with Darlene and my mom and doing things that I really enjoyed doing the last 2 days, just in case. It's weird to say, but just in case it's the last time I do that. Mm-hmm. One thing it has taught me is that I'm not afraid to die. And I believe my faith is involved there because I know where I'm going. So that wasn't a fear, but the fear was if I didn't make it, okay, but I made it.
So that, in other words, you would
basically captured in my body.
Yes,
That's scary.
Yeah. So you would have a serious disability where basically, like you
And
said, you would not be present. You would be kind of, it's caught in your head.
Now we'll circle back to that because that's been very similar to what I've been experiencing the last year. But anyway, what was interesting immediately after the procedure is I experienced, it might be overshared for people, but I experienced sexual arousal for the smallest things. I experienced emotions. I would be washing the dishes and suddenly I'm angry, but I can't tell you why. We were joking, my friends and I, that I basically have got into male menopause or something like that because it was all these unexplained emotions that had no connection. And I learned later that it's probably because of the areas that were stimulated going into my brain that it changed me. Another interesting thing is one of the things I do is I do brain profiles or assessments, where you look at people's brains on a very large level and just find out certain traits from what you see from the answers they get. And I moved completely from a strong left brain person, a strong factual, that kind of thing, to a far more people orientated, emotive, and imaginative area of my brain. So that's interesting because the aneurysm happened on the left hand side.
Yes. Where the more language actually also sits there. Like the forming of analytical language and the right side, if you all remember that we said the right side is also involved, but it is more of the emotional assessment of it.
So since then, it's been permanently shifted that way. I am far more people orientated than the factual that I used to call the linear thinking version that I was before.
If I may just also say something here for the students, we always study Phineas Gage, who of course is one of the landmark case studies we look at where he had that rod go right through his brain from the bottom, right? And we know that in his case, of course, it went towards the right. He became really angry, and where it typically been really polite, friendly, empathetic person, it totally changed his brain. So for you, it was kind of the opposite,
Yeah.
right? Because of the areas, like you said,
Yeah.
that were affected as
And I
they.
must say, I'm glad, actually, to be
Yeah,
honest.
yeah, it's probably preferable, right?
It's made me a person that I'm happier with. Now, some of these things are going to come back to what's happened in the last while as well. So immediately after all those things, those were the emotions. And as you asked, there was definitely a shift. Um, I then experienced a number of years, actually since then, there's been years of struggling to manage the pain. And then by 2017, no, sorry, 2016,
2016, yeah.
May 2016, one evening I drove down to Durban. I was in Bloemfontein at the time. I drove down to Durban, a whole day journey, and I made supper for a bunch of friends at the friend's house that I was staying at to do business. And during supper, or making it, I started feeling weird. So I went to sit down, and it ended up being a pretty protracted seizure that I got that evening.
Yes.
And then we were looking at seizures in my life, also we thought. So that's the next area that came in.
And you know, students, we know in this module and next module, as we said, we're also looking at seizures, right? The different kinds of seizures. Grand mal seizures, of course, being the most extreme, where the whole brain is in an electric storm. So it
That was a
seemed
grand
to.
mal seizure. Yeah.
So that looked like a grand mal seizure.
Yeah, it definitely was. So
It was
in hindsight, even things that I've learned now, it definitely was. And I had a few of those over the years after that, because I didn't get proper treatment. What is interesting again is how the brain changed. Because after having the seizure, I played piano, and I have for years. Suddenly, I couldn't play unless I played something from memory. If I played without music, I could play something really complex. If I played something that is simple, that I could interpret, remember in advance, keep the rhythm, I couldn't play from a hymnal. I just couldn't. It was my brain couldn't function. It's like that part of my brain was switched off now, changed.
So it's really fascinating because the students, they just watched in the memory chapter, the case study of Clive Wearing, who, because of encephalitis, a really bad infection, lost his ability to make new short-term and long-term memories. And so, you know, this is just the beauty. We've talked about implicit learning, you know, and I said, students, I hope I can demonstrate what I do in therapy, because I work primarily with implicit memory, implicit learning. In your case, it sounds like the same thing, right? That your internal, that implicit experience, the muscle memory, if you please, is there and has been there. It's the analytical side of being able to remember how to read the more explicit information. Much more difficult.
Yeah. So what I used to find when I played piano, the easiest was just take a piece of music, put it in front of me, interpret it, and make something simple into a song.
Make an arrangement.
I couldn't do that. I couldn't even do plain notes. I literally had to keep the things I could remember. And over time, I had to teach my brain. Now, this is going back and forth, the actual how the body helps the brain to reconnect. Because if I didn't play piano, I believe that my recovery would have been slower.
Yes. And actually, you know, being trained in somatic experiencing therapy, absolutely, the belief is more and more so when we look at recovery from emotional trauma as well as physical trauma, you have to move your body. You do not think yourself forward. Learning happens through sensory experience, through actually moving, right? And in this case, like you said, actually playing the piano. And I'm jumping a little bit because this is very important when we're jumping forward to ADHD and children who early on in life get taught to play piano or an instrument like that, how it helps to wire the brain towards structure that they might not have otherwise naturally have had, right? So folks with ADHD have a chance to play an instrument early on. The brains have some more structure than maybe those who don't, right?
Yeah, so makes sense. So after that, I was stuck in South Africa. I didn't get good medical help really. I was on the government help medical system, so I would have to wait like 9 months to get an ECG done or a CAT scan or something like that, and it got protracted. So I, to a certain extent, was helped with basic medication. Then after that, I just had to carry on with what I had, if that makes sense, and get those repeated. It gets a little complex, but it gets very fascinating because in that process, they've given me, actually, they started off just after my aneurysm to try and manage the headaches that came back. They were giving me anti-seizure drugs and anti-inflammatories and a drug that's a calcium blocker, so it stops the arteries from contracting.
Say that one more time.
It's a calcium blocker because it
blocker.
stops spasms in the artery. Now, my headaches that I get sometimes have these sharp, like pains, like jabbing pains to it. And that started back in 2012 already, so just a little while after my procedure. And now this is something that happens too, is I lose my train of thought. Now I need to go back a little. So my memory is, it depends on the day how well I can remember what I say. So I was talking about seizures and
the medication.
The calcium, the medication.
Yes.
You were talking about strokes and circle of Willis. Now, apparently, genetically, it seems that I have a problem with calcium and how it affects my arteries, and I'm prone to get spasms, which then cause these really bad poking feelings inside my brain. Because it would take the coil of the aneurysm and literally push it repeatedly against
the optic nerve
to the point that it's now being slightly damaged. So that was just an interesting aside as to we were talking about the circle of Willis. So after that, because of the fact that it was badly managed, I would get these repeated, more like focal seizures. They weren't fully seizures, like I wasn't foaming. I sometimes was aware what's going on. I would vomit, but it would always be left-sided and spasms I couldn't control. And until about 2 years ago, September, I thought I was actually having seizures. And there were times that I did. Afterwards, I'd feel exhausted. I feel everything you would feel when you have seizures. So it's the post-stroke. So I just accepted it as this is what's happening to me, and it's just a complication. When I spoke to certain doctors, they said that because I had the aneurysm, they had preempted by putting me on all those medications, partly to help the pain, but also partly because it now is a risk. I'm like, okay, this makes sense. The risk that I would get seizures. Then I got to the US, 2022. By September, I'd seen a neurologist, and he felt that I wasn't getting seizures, that it was complex migraines. So he immediately took me off. I was on something called valproic acid, actually Epilim, which is sodium valproate. And
because sodium is what the pain signals are, sodium gates that flood the
wow, okay. Yeah. Interesting. So they often use the seizure medication for pain. So I was on sodium valproate, I was on the calcium blocker, and I think that was all I was on at the time. And he started taking me off the seizure medication because he felt it was a migraine. And interestingly enough, the chances are he was right. Just the way he went about it was a little frustrating. So by last year, May last year. No, actually, it was about March. I was almost tapered off the seizure medication. When I started feeling, I see the aura coming. I feel out of my body experiences, all the weirdness that I used to feel before a seizure happens. And then I'd have to sleep. And then afterwards, I feel all the exhaustion and all the other symptoms. So we thought it just carried on.
So you were thinking you're having seizures in your sleep.
Yes, so yeah. That's what, because I'd woken up to a seizure or two already on my own, so it just made sense. And then by May, I was fully off the medication, and he decided to put me on because I started feeling out of it. He decided he's going to put me on a different seizure medication just to try, because it would be either that or I would have to wear a EEG at home.
Got it.
So And we thought it was a quicker route would just be to get me going because I wanted to get my life started. I wanted to start working, all these things. And the day that I started taking the new one, that evening, I had a seizure.
When you started taking what?
The new medication
The new
he had
medication.
provided, I had a seizure. So that started a whole journey. I won't go into all those details, but I'll, the highlights of it are quite useful. So, um, so basically, he felt that trauma, because I had emotional trauma, was causing these pseudo seizures, and actually, ultimately, I just suffered from migraines.
So if I can just interrupt there too, this is something we've talked about quite a lot, and I know, um, I've had the fortune of training, of course, with trauma. I'm doing bottom-up therapies, and I have myself worked with people in the past who have had seizures once the doctors determined that it didn't seem to be an actual seizure, but rather a neurological expression of emotional pain, right? And then, once we took care of the trauma, it often totally eliminated the seizures, right? But
Yeah.
it's never sure. I always tell my clients, because mind body is not a separate thing,
No, and the brain
right?
is
So
complex.
yeah, so you have to, and I talk about pain all the time because I actually have a lot of clients that I work with who come to me who have pain. Now, I don't specialize in pain per se, but the side effect of taking care of the trauma, right, often releases pain.
Yeah.
It's just fascinating, this journey. So yeah, so this is fascinating, right? So the doctor felt that maybe there was some trauma
Yeah.
related brain activity
Also,
happening.
from what I've told him, because when my seizure started, I
Yes.
did have a severe emotional trauma in a relationship. So it was really, really bad. It was
Yeah.
abusive, and I was trapped and things like that. So when it made sense.
Yeah.
So then my brain started changing so quickly. I didn't know what was going on. Literally between May and June,
Of
I
last
ended
year,
up
right?
of last year. I ended up in the ICU. Oh, sorry, in the emergency room twice. By ambulance. So I've had an ambulance trip in the US twice, um, and um, that didn't help me. But the reason we thought I needed to go to the emergency room was I had felt like a rebound seizure the one afternoon, and I literally couldn't speak, and half of my body was
Paralyzed,
my face was drooping and things like that. So I thought I had had a stroke.
right?
My mom too, because she'd seen regular seizures. My husband hadn't seen a bad seizure on me before, and then he did it once, but this was so different. So I had to start exploring, and now suddenly the neurologist I was seeing said, "Oh well, he doesn't think it's migraines anymore, or now it's emotional trauma." So um, I said, okay, fine, I'm going to deal with everything while we're looking for the emotional trauma and dealing with it, because I've been seeing a psychologist, I've been seeing a psychiatrist, I've had many different experiences, but there are some traumas that I hadn't accessed, which I know about. And what was interesting is now I was getting these episodes where suddenly I can't move, I'm trapped in my body, my big
Trapped in your
sphere,
body, yeah.
I can't speak, I had to mumble. And then my husband and my mom would try and figure out what I'm needing, if it's water, if I need to move, if I'm uncomfortable, because for the next half hour, I can't speak or move. Um, and while that's happening, I started experiencing more and more vivid images of the traumas I've gone through as a child and so on. So eventually, I ended up connecting with somebody that you actually know, darling,
Yeah.
and the training with what's the doctor's name?
Yeah, so Michael, right? Isn't it
Yes,
Michael?
Michael.
Yeah.
Yeah, Michael. Yeah,
Cortez, right?
Cortina. Cortina.
Cortina, yeah, Michael Cortina. Michael Cortina was somebody I've met through the years in my training. So we've been trained in the same therapeutic background. And I was thinking he probably would be able to do a lot of work with the trauma.
And it was mind blowing. We did a whole day session, and my way of thinking and experiencing certain things. I now have to think back on what was the trauma, why did it bug me. It's almost like I've got to work to go find those
Yes.
files.
This is just
So,
the beauty. If I can just stop, it always makes me so excited because, it's hard to explain to people who haven't actually experienced the therapy we're talking about. Because traditionally we think once you've experienced trauma, pretty much the trauma will remain. It just maybe diminishes in intensity, but in the therapeutic modalities that I've been trained in, Michael Cortina has been trained in, we actually can take care of it permanently. And when we talked about it in the memory component, if you did watch my lectures, I hope you did, we talked about memory reconsolidation, right? And that's really what we're doing. We're accessing that memory in a safe, peaceful environment and completely rewriting the way the brain experiences it, which then allows our hippocampus, as I said, is our librarian, and she doesn't work well under stress. So she makes memory errors. So when we re-access that memory and we do it in a calm, peaceful, totally different atmosphere, she can relax, she can start filing everything away, and it's done, right? Now you have to think
And
about,
future filing too, because anything
yeah,
that's similar to that just gets put into the right place.
absolutely, right, because similar is
So
experience is
yeah,
exactly the same. Yes.
so now that was removed, but it still carried on. So ultimately, we discovered the Diamond Headache Clinic. My psychiatrist actually suggested that I come here. Dr. Diamond, my doctor's father, started this clinic about 50 years ago here in Chicago. And people literally fly in from all over the country. And when you get admitted, which I did earlier this year for 10, 11 days, you stay in the hospital and they break the pain cycle. Because
Mhm.
something she's explained to me now is, which I kind of knew, but it makes what I'm experiencing make more sense, is because my brain for the last quarter of my life has been used to certain pain channels.
Yeah, it's like a habit.
Immediately, yeah, it's like a habit. So my brain goes there. It doesn't have to. And the more we block something, then it finds the other route that's less common. Then it finds, and so it's the way she explained to me now. I suffer from some kind of migraine and cluster headaches. Um, Whether it was caused by the aneurysm or not, that's not something anybody can, because the brain is so complex, nobody can
Right.
now say, this is the origin, this is the solution. But she feels that I am getting pseudo seizures in the sense whenever my pain gets so much, because pain levels literally, you get to the place where it's 8 or 9 out of 10, you can't think. It feels like your inside of your brain is scraping against your the
Right.
skull,
Yeah.
and it's sharp edges, and it feels like you've got brain freeze repeatedly in your head, but 10 times what it usually is if I eat ice cream, and it just carries on and on. And she feels that my brain had gotten to this place where it says, fine, now I'm going to shut down. So it
So
stopped me being able to speak or move.
So in essence, the way I think of it, and I don't know if this is accurate, but I always tell my clients, we have a bandwidth, and bandwidth this is how much energy, right, our mind body has. And it doesn't matter if it's emotional or physical or mental. And when it reaches a certain level of depletion, it's going to withdraw energy from non-essential parts, right? And at least that's how I've thought about it.
That makes
And
sense, yeah.
right. And pain, of course, is our strongest messenger. And if it doesn't get heard, if it's not taken care of, it's just going to get louder and louder, essentially taking over all of the bandwidth until
Yeah.
there's nothing left. And the rest of your body's like, okay, I'm out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even the emotional elements that it, so when the trauma started, I got certain experiences from that trauma. Those bandwidths also got flooded. So whether the seizure was started by trauma or the trauma
Right.
is now the issue, all of it's just
Right.
bundled up into one place. This is the way the brain's functioning now, and we need to break that. So yes, I spent my latest part of my journey now. I'm starting to get to the point where I am able to drive again,
Yeah.
short distances, because we never know when it's going to hit.
Yeah.
It's been about 3 weeks since I've not been able to move or speak.
Okay, that's pretty
Um,
good, right?
I get weekly procedures. They do mostly SPG blocks, but we finished that. Now we're going to try other areas. And I'm not going as often because sometimes I was getting 2 procedures a week. So it was just a lot.
Yeah.
And being in hospital too, they put you on a drip. I can't remember what I should have looked it up. There's a specific drip that they put people on with um, migraines. Firstly, magnesium drips for the 11 days. And in between, there's some other thing that they put in. You do 8 or 9 cycles of it. And if that doesn't break the pain, then they do another series of these drips. They're
Mhm.
pretty intense. They're pretty abrasive. So I know you're going to, I love hearing this, but I had drips put in me every second day because it wouldn't last, things like that. And then every 3 hours, you get to choose what painkillers you want to try out. Because what they need to do, I know it sounds crazy, but they need to get to the point where, firstly, you've got good abortives. Abortives are that you can take when you feel the pain's going to get too much and you're going to get a migraine attack of some kind. And
So it's
they like
almost
give you
like
options.
sorry, it's almost like you now are even more aware of the signals that lead up
Yes.
before the actual
Yes.
intense
I've
pain.
actually got an app, Migraine Buddy, where I actually check the weather. I check what, if the weather warns me, then I put little earplugs in that I've got. So I've become far more aware. And I've got to be emotionally aware, because if I get to certain emotional points, it can trigger it too.
Which
Um,
is just, the students and I have been talking about the insular cortex, which is something I love to be in, right? And insular cortex is our interoception, our awareness of our internal self, which is also our awareness of our emotions, right? So the more we are empowered to know what's going on inside, the more we can, in this case, it's very closely connected to pain as well,
yeah,
right?
yeah. And other physical symptoms. I mean, if I'm not aware enough and I don't do something about a stressor, about heat, about a pressure change in time, I might get to the place where my brain says, okay, I'm not going to do anything. You can't talk or speak.
Yes,
So you need to switch off.
yes.
And so I have to take my life back to be able to actually go outside. I was stuck here at home in 2 rooms, never alone. Either at home when my mom's alone at home and my husband was working, he would my mom would have to look after me, and to the point where I needed to be lifted sometimes and moved. And when he gets home, I can then be in the bathroom. I can't bath alone, all those things, because I might just not be able to move and I can't call for help. Because there's been times when I would be lying in bed and one of them would be, I've been in the room and they would leave. And in the 5 minutes that they go to make coffee, I suddenly can't move or speak. And I could be lying on a bad place that I can't breathe properly. So it just got really complex. But we're getting out of it now. Um, I am on better preventative medications. We're breaking that cycle. I've dealt with the emotion. I'm becoming way more aware of the smallest things. If I'm driving somewhere, take my mom for groceries, and it's just the two of us. She doesn't have a license at the moment. I need to be aware that the music is just getting a little bit irritating, because that's one of my signs that I'm going to have a migraine, or the lights are a little bit flashy,
So
or
you're getting sensory
yes,
overload.
very, yeah. And it's sensory overload is one of my big triggers of weather conditions, and then stress and sensory overload. But the sensory overload is not just a trigger, it's also a warning. So if I catch it soon enough, it's
Mm.
just the warning, and then I can do something about it. If I don't, it goes into something bigger, which then
Mm.
shuts my body down because I didn't listen.
Well, and
So
and that's what I always say, I have a little simple story, which I haven't told the students yet, but this is my little spiel that I tell my clients. I say, think about a guy that goes to a restaurant, and as soon as he sits down, he goes, server, server, give me some soup. I want some soup right now. Now, how does the server get him to stop asking for soup? Well, first answer is, here you go, sir. Yes, have your soup. Second answer is, sorry, sir, no, not giving you soup, or I don't have any soup, right? The third answer is, sir, I see you, I hear you, it's being taken care of. But if that guy does not get acknowledged, what is he likely to do?
carry on.
Carry on and get louder and
Yep.
more obnoxious, right?
Yeah.
Eventually he's throwing over the chair and screaming and all that kind of stuff. That guy represents our internal voice. And our mind, I talk about donkey mind. Our donkey mind does not differentiate, that subconscious part, between physical threat and perceived emotional threat,
Yeah.
right? And so in this case, right, if we don't pay attention, it will get louder and louder and louder. And so
Yep.
you're learning how to listen to it way before
Yeah.
it gets to the loud part. I joke that it eventually hits us on the side of the head with a 2x4,
That's very true. It does for
right?
me. Literally hits me on the
Literally
side.
on the side of the head, right? And we don't
Yep.
want that. We ideally, and of course, there's no way to know something until you learn
Yeah.
to pay attention, which is what
Yeah.
you've had to do, right? So if you had to kind of summarize possibly what you've learned, that could be useful to the students, because many of them, by the way, many of the students are going to go either into clinical work like therapists, some pre-meds, psychiatry and things like that. Some things that you've learned that you think might be useful for the students.
Sure. One of the major things I've learned is, and that's continual growth. You can't just learn it and then it's done, is I have to be in touch with that internal voice. If I don't listen to the physical and emotional triggers, or not just triggers, little hints and warnings, I will have to deal with it in some major physical way.
That 2x4, right?
Yeah. So it goes very quickly, exponentially from I'm warning you to, okay, you're not listening at this point. It's getting less so because I am listening more. So my body's not acting as strongly because it's, oh wait, the brain's kind of seeing that I'm working with you, so we'll keep the warnings mild. So being emotionally and physically in touch with my body. So if I'm feeling a pain, if I'm feeling a discomfort, I need to be aware of where it's originating, emotional or physical, and what can I do to diffuse that so that it doesn't become something bigger.
Yes.
That's the one major thing that helps me.
Yes.
That I'm growing on continually. The other thing, which just has been a fascinating thing to look at, is just how complex my brain is. And even migraines, even seeing specialists who's been doing this for 35 years, they still can't give you all the answers. They can just deal with what the brain's giving as hints to what we can fix. What I mean by that is, if I'm getting a seizure-like experience, it isn't necessarily a seizure. My brain's trying to help me. It's trying to speak to me.
Yes.
If I do have a seizure, my brain's going to rewire over time if I allow it to learn new things. So all of these changes happening constantly, and it is mind-blowingly, ironically, or whatever the term is. It's kind of funny, but it is mind-blowing how well the brain can adapt.
Yes. And that's that beautiful thing, right? That's neuroplasticity, is that, thank goodness, as we've been talking about this semester, that, the brain, even though it does most of the synaptogenesis when we are really young, that neuroplasticity allows us, the brain, to find a new pathway, right? And that there are so many billions and trillions of possible connections, and that, God created us the system where, even though technically, and we talked about this in this module, will be about a girl who had a whole lobotomy where the whole lobe was removed, right? That technically she shouldn't be able to have the ability to talk and um to use language, and to possibly some movement would be affected. Now, of course, she was really young. Her brain rewired and in a number of months she was speaking and dancing, right? And so just this amazing ability. And then, of course, we've just discovered, as we've talked about before, when we talked about learning and memory, that we now have discovered that it seems like the brain is regenerating new neurons, especially in the hippocampal region. So just some amazing things about the brain, right? That as long as you learn to pay attention, right? To bring awareness to that, what's going on, that it's grown you as a person while you figured out some of this stuff.
So I have a responsibility to myself. I can either just deal with the cycle of whatever my body's doing and carry on for the rest of my life being incapacitated, or I can mentally learn something and emotionally learn something that will physically help me feel different.
Right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I figured it would make it way more real for somebody who's actually experienced the three things, right? We don't even talk about migraines necessarily, but it's so closely connected to the pain conversation. But just make it real, as the students are studying circle of Willis, aneurysms, we're going to be looking at strokes, tumors, and things like that. And just, the actual real life experience of it. So we really, truly experience, very grateful. Thank you.